Good evening and welcome to SICAMM. My name is Andrew Brown, board member of SICAMM, Science Committee Coordinator and joint host with Gabrielle Solland, Chairperson SICAMM. I'm a dentist, Managing Director of B4 Project, a non-academic PhD supervisor in a Natural Environment Research Council PhD with Dr. Mari Knight and Victoria Buswell at Plymouth University, looking at the UK's native honeybee. This is the fifth SICAMM presentation in a series of 23 presentations. Aoife Nick Giolla Coda is chair of the Native Irish Bee Society, NIHBS. Aoife runs the Galtee honeybee farm. She's a fourth generation beekeeper, and today she will present native honeybee conservation in Ireland. NIHBS has just published a book entitled The Native Irish Honeybee, with a foreword by Professor Thomas Seeley, Cornell University. He says, "I envy the Irish beekeepers for having Apis mellifera mellifera as their honeybee, and I admire how the Native Irish Honeybee Society is working hard to promote this beautiful bee with its fascinating suite of adaptations for thriving in Ireland." NIHBS also managed to broker a joint statement against the importation of honeybee packages into Ireland. The statement was agreed and supported by the Native Irish Honeybee Society, the Irish Beekeeping Association, the Federation of Irish Beekeepers Associations, the Ulster Beekeepers Association, and the Institute of Northern Ireland Beekeepers. Without further ado, I will hand over to Aoife.
So I'm delighted to be here to speak about native honeybee conservation in Ireland. So this evening we'll just we'll start with Apis mellifera mellifera in Ireland, the traits that beekeepers here would find desirable. We'll then look at an overview of honeybee conservation in Ireland for Apis mellifera mellifera. We'll start with a little bit about the background and the history of the conservation movement, and we'll then focus on the Native Irish Honeybee Society, which is the main body for conserving Apis mellifera mellifera in Ireland, and we will look at some of the projects that are ongoing in Ireland at the moment. So some of the characteristics and traits of Irish Apis mellifera mellifera. So these would be traits that beekeepers in Ireland would find desirable and advantageous to our Irish climate and environment. So just starting with brood pattern and pollen. So our Apis mellifera mellifera here in Ireland, or we also call it the native Irish honeybee or the black bee, we like them to surround the brood with pollen and to store surplus pollen in frames at the front of the brood nest. And also they're very hairy bees, so they're very good at catching plenty of pollen grains, and they're really good pollen collectors. And this is just a little photo of some of the variety of pollen we have in Ireland in the summertime when the weather is fine. Most of it comes from our Irish hedgerows. The hedgerows are really important in Ireland. They're really the lifelines of the honeybees and other pollinators. Unfortunately, they are under a lot of threat, they have great plant biodiversity. They're under a lot of threat due to destruction and overcutting and lack of management in general. And the hedgerows, we have the lowest forestation rate in Europe. We have only 7% of our land is covered in forest, but the hedgerows make up for that. They're in a lot of ways, they're a really important carbon sink here in Ireland. Wintering is really important as well, that our bees are able to overwinter in a tight cluster with restricted brood activity and low food consumption, and that they can tolerate long periods of confinement well. This image is covered in snow. We don't get a lot of snow in winter time in Ireland, but we do get long, wet, relatively cold winters, so it's important that they can tolerate these long periods without showing the signs of stress. Surplus honey storage is really important to us as well in those bad summer months when we have bad weather. So this is mainly due to their ability to be thrifty with their stores. They also their modest populations and their ability to fly at relatively low temperatures as well. So it's really important that our bees, if they get a week of higher temperatures in the summertime, so maybe a week of 19 degrees Celsius, that they collect as much nectar as possible. But equally, it's just as important that when the subsequent week, 2 or 3 weeks, is much lower temperatures and lots of rain, that they can hold on to these honey stores and conserve them really well. And this results in a surplus honey production in most years. We harvest, usually the beginning of August. Most beekeepers in Ireland would harvest their honey, and generally we will have surplus honey, even if we do have a bad weather in the summertime. Wax comb building is really important as well, and they're excellent at building honeycomb, and they also allow an air pocket underneath the wax capping to aid against fermentation. And some beekeepers will put completely empty frames in between drawn frames of honeycomb and just allow the bees to build their own comb, because they're really good at it. And if they get the fine weather, they can build the honeycomb quite quickly also. Propolis collection as well. They collect propolis abundantly, which is great. Swarming and supersedure. So this varies depending on the different strains of Apis mellifera mellifera in different parts of the countries, or it varies from beekeeper to beekeeper. And they can vary so much, partly due to their genetic diversity. They're all very different from, one part of the country to the other. You'll have some colonies where you'll have supersedure, in the 3rd or 4th year, and sometimes perfect supersedure, with the queen mother and the queen daughter laying in the colony at the same time for a season or part of a season. But you do have you can have very swarmy strains as well, and you can have strains that swarm, but they're less of a tendency to swarm. And most beekeepers would selectively breed towards less swarming tendencies. But in general, we don't mind some swarming. That's just a characteristic, and we accept that, and we just carry out swarm control. And if we do lose the odd swarm, we don't really mind. It's a growing belief in Ireland that if a swarm is lost, that we just hope that that swarm will survive in the wild for multiple years, that may have signs of varroa tolerance, and that their genetics will contribute to the managed colonies in the form of their drones. Temperament can vary very much as well, in our strains of Apis mellifera mellifera. So we can have very docile strains, but there are also aggressive strains out there as well. Also, I suppose it's important to bear in mind that up until 30 years ago, there really was not very much selective breeding in Ireland at all. We're not known for our honey production or bee breeding in general, in history. But, these are just some examples of our docile strains. So the photograph on the right was a world record attempt from 2005 that was carried out by Galtee Bee Breeding Group. It was carried out to mark the opening of A.m.m, which was held in Dublin that year. And the brave man that's underneath all the bees is the late Philip McCabe. And we just covered him with lots and lots of bees. And he did really well. He only got 7 stings, I think, and the bees were on him for about 3 hours. So that was really good. The photograph on the left then is a Dutch artist, Jeroen Singa. He saw the photographs of Philip and he decided he'd like to have the same thing done. So he came over to Ireland and we covered him with bees. And he's not a beekeeper, he had no beekeeping experience, but he did really well and didn't get stung a whole lot either. So there's some of the traits that we would value in Ireland. So just a little bit of a background to the conservation movement in Ireland. It began in the late 1980s, and there was already a large community of beekeepers here in Ireland that were committed to the black bees. Many would have considered the black bees as part of the Irish heritage. They would have grown up with native black bees and would have recognised, their many advantages. And there was very little breeding went on at this point in time. No DNA or morphometric evidence existed either, but it was widely accepted that we had pure populations of apes mellifera, and there was no organised conservation group either. Some regions around this time experienced an increase in importations of other subspecies, leading to hybridization and resulting in a loss of native traits and often aggressive, unpredictable honeybees. Brother Adam from Buckfast Abbey, at the time that the so-called Isle of Wight disease arrived in Britain, eventually he made a declaration that the old English bee was extinct, and even though he didn't mention about the Irish bee, but unfortunately those in Ireland that would promote the use of non-native subspecies, they continuously used this argument that the Irish bee was extinct also due to the Isle of Wight disease. So this was perpetuated throughout the rest of the 20th century. So even though we had a history of, Dutch bees, came into Ireland at one stage, but we still, we have the evidence that there is unique Irish genetics there as well. So BIBA, the Bee Improvement and Bee Breeders Association, around the time was the representative body for those in Ireland, interested in apes mellifera, and of course it still is the body for those in Britain, and there are still Irish members of BIBA as well. They were a fantastic support and encouragement to the Irish movement at this time, and under their guidance, Micheál Mac Giolla Coda and Redmond Williams set up the first Irish conservation group, and that was called Galtee Bee Breeding Group. It was formed in 1991, and it was based in the Galtee V Valley, and all the beekeepers in that region agreed only to keep native Irish black honeybees. And it was an ideal area because of its geographical isolation. There are two mountain ranges, the Galtee Mountains to the north, which are in the image on the left, and the Knockmildown Mountains to the south, which are featured in this image on the right. And then there were buffer zones outside each end of the valley of pure Apis mellifera to protect the VCA. So a Galtee Bee Breeding Group devised the Dún Aonghasa system. This was inspired by the ancient fortress Dún Aonghasa, which is in Inishmore in the Aran Islands in the west of Ireland. There's an image of it in the background there. Unfortunately, half of it is gone due to erosion, but you can see from the image that there were three, it contained three walls of defense. So in the Galtee Valley, they set up three rings of defense in the form of apiaries. So the breeding apiary was at the center of the region, and then the surrounding apiaries formed the rings of defense. And there was an emphasis put on drone production so that the region was flooded with drones, and any non-native drones that may find their way into the area would be outnumbered significantly. Galtee Bee Breeding Group set up queen rearing workshops and morphometry workshops and started to produce queens for beekeepers in Ireland in order to propagate the genetic resource of Apis mellifera mellifera. Beekeepers, even though it was meant to be just a regional organisation, beekeepers from all over Ireland joined. And as a result of that, they set up their own various bee improvement groups in their own areas, cooperating to keep just Apis mellifera mellifera and using their own local ecotypes of Apis mellifera mellifera. And they were helped very much by the local beekeeping associations, which already had a strong network of beekeepers. So GBBG grew larger and larger with membership from across Ireland. So eventually it was decided an organisation needed to be formed to represent all of Ireland, north and south. And so the Native Irish Honeybee Society was formed, or NIHBS we call it, and that was in 2012. So what are the aims of NIHBS? Its main aims are the conservation study, improvement and reintroduction of Apis mellifera mellifera, to establish areas of conservation, to encourage bee improvement groups, to provide education and public awareness, to act in an advisory capacity, to cooperate with beekeeping organisations in Ireland, and to seek the help of the scientific community. We have approximately 600 members, and it's a very well organised organisation. We've a core group of dedicated volunteers that keep the whole thing running smoothly and in charge of projects and lots of people, everyone has their own roles within the society. And we also have an excellent network of beekeepers there through the membership. NIHBS produces a quarterly journal called The Four Seasons, and that's, it's a really good publication. Lots of interesting articles on queen rearing and bee improvement and Apis mellifera mellifera, and really, really well edited. We also published a series of booklets and leaflets on all sorts of topics, swarming, queen introduction, rewilding, nukes, and many, many more topics. And we're very proud of our newly published book, The Native Irish Honeybee. It's divided into various sections covering evolution, genetics, history, conservation, and bee improvement. And it took about 2 years to get to publication stage. And it, all the chapters in it are contributed by beekeepers across Ireland. And we were privileged that Professor Thomas Seeley from Cornell University wrote the foreword to it. And we were very grateful to a beekeeper here in Ireland, Jane Sellers, who volunteered to lay out the whole book page by page. So yeah, it's just we're very excited about this book because we just launched it there in September. And if anyone would like to buy the book, it's for sale on our online shop, NIHBS.org. So NIHBS holds workshops and training days, national conferences, regional events. This is all pre-COVID, and we hope to, return to these events down the line. But, they're all great for beekeepers to network, share ideas and experience. And the workshops and training days in particular that we support and help out in, they're great because you get beekeepers from all levels of experience, from beginners that are coming to learn new skills in queen rearing and bee breeding, or the intermediate beekeepers as well, learning new skills. And you've experienced beekeepers there that come to instruct and to teach the skills that they have developed over the years. We also produce a product label which is available to our members that keep only Apis mellifera mellifera. So you can see an image of it there in the bottom photograph. And this is it's really good for advertising to the public that we have a native Irish honeybee here in Ireland, and that it's also good for raising the value of the honey for those selling the honey. Voluntary Conservation Areas, or VCAs, are a key tool in the protection of populations here in Ireland. So in these VCAs, the majority of beekeepers work together to maintain Apis mellifera mellifera. Unfortunately, we have been unable to obtain legal status for any of these. They're all completely voluntary. And this is a map showing all our current VCAs. There are 20 in total so far, and you can see they're spread out throughout the island. And but there are some more that over the next couple of years are going to be established, and hopefully this will grow. They will grow as the years go on. So the Queen Rearing Group scheme. This is a scheme that NIHBS established this year. It's a 2-year scheme initially, and its aims are to establish new groups, new queen rearing groups in Ireland around the country where there are none existing, and to help these groups to develop proficiency in queen rearing and breeding. NIHBS also provides them with quality stock to breed from, and it's hoped that after 2 years, in year 3, that these groups will help to support another round of new queen rearing groups. And there's a really dedicated team, core team within NIHBS that is in charge of these groups and mentoring them, because the mentoring is so important. The A.m.m management strategy. So this is a live document which has been formed by between NIHBS and the National University of Ireland, Galway, NUIG. And because it's a live document, it can be updated as time goes on or adapted depending on the needs at the time. So it includes promotion of education and awareness, production of overwintered nukes of local bees for beginners, formation of wild reserves of Apis mellifera mellifera. So these would be in the, hopefully in, national parks and, reserves where beekeepers wouldn't be allowed to bring in their managed colonies. And stocking these reserves with wild A.m.m colonies that come from swarms that have been surviving for multiple years in the wild without varroa treatment. Increased self-sufficiency in local ecotypes of honeys with an emphasis on A.m.m and the establishment of isolated mating apiaries. So the status of A.m.m in Ireland, a survey by NUIG found that 90% of Irish beekeepers work with A.m.m at this point in time. So this is very encouraging. However, the bee still is under a lot of threat. It is the preferred bee for larger Irish honey producers, mainly due to their, the honey production, their productivity in our Irish climate and their survivability. And they're also favoured by many hobby beekeepers and part-time beekeepers. And so you would think that, because of our status in Ireland, we do have a lot of populations and they're spread out around the country, and, so many beekeepers keep Apis mellifera mellifera. We should be in a good situation. And we are, in one way, we're in a great situation, but we still do have an awful lot of threats. So compromised VCAs would be one of the threats. At the moment, 2 of Ireland's oldest VCAs are being compromised, and that's South Tipperary and Connemara, and you can see them there where the black dots are highlighting these 2 areas. And this is because buckfast beekeepers have moved into these regions and are actively producing nuclei for sale, and they're contaminating the genetics of the region. Another threat is misunderstanding. So Ireland has 99 species of bees made up of bumblebees, solitary bees, and the honeybee. And most beekeepers know that, the best way to help the bees is to make our environment pollinator friendly. This is essential. And many members of the public know this as well. However, also there are many people that think to save the bees means to buy a hive of bees, that they think that's the way to help the bees, whereas obviously you're only helping one species of bees by doing that, and it does nothing for the other 98 species that are here in Ireland. And the problem with this is that it accelerates the demand for honeybees, and in turn it increases importations of non-native honeybees to meet this demand. So it does more harm than good, especially if someone is buying these bees to help the bees and they're bringing them into a VCA. Also, lack of supply is a threat. So there is an insatiable demand for A.m.m. queens and nuclei in Ireland, but Ireland cannot keep up with the demand, unfortunately. There are simply not enough breeders and producers here in Ireland. So a lot of this has to do with our Irish summer weather. It's often not very conducive to queen rearing. You know, we don't produce huge amounts of honey or do a lot of bee breeding in this country compared to many other countries because of our weather. And because our summers are so unpredictable, if we get, we might have a summer where there's only 6 or 7 days above 20 degrees Celsius between May and September. This can cause problems with, from time to time with unsuccessful queen matings. But we do have a suppliers list on NIHBS.org of, very dedicated suppliers. Most of them will only supply within Ireland, though, because, they're trying to supply as many Irish beekeepers as possible to combat the demand for imports. But without a doubt, the biggest threat to Apis mellifera in Ireland is importations of non-native honeybees. So imports of queen bees rose by 89% in 2018 compared to 2017. This remained constant for 2019, and then it rose by 300% in 2020. So this is really alarming, because all these importations are, they're from Italy and Germany in general, and they're not Apis mellifera. So most of us here in Ireland would consider, non-native subspecies coming into Ireland invasive alien subspecies, and we could face extinction through hybridization if this trend continues. A British bee importer earlier on this year had 1,000 colonies brought into Northern Ireland from southern Italy, and they made their way then onto Britain. The reason this happened was because of Brexit. He couldn't import them directly into Britain. However, there was a loophole in the Brexit protocol that he could import them directly into Northern Ireland, allow them to fly freely, and then move them on to Britain. So this was really, really alarming for us in Ireland. Nothing like this had ever happened before. And this is, like the amount of colonies, I think it's actually 800 colonies altogether. This amount is huge. Our population in Ireland is not very big, and this is also reflected in our honeybee populations. So this would have huge consequences, these amount of colonies being transported. Another British bee importer publicly stated that he was considering a colony production unit in the Republic of Ireland, somewhere in County Cork or County Wicklow, and both these counties have very strong Apis mellifera populations. And this was very worrying. Again, both incidents kind of, were kind of publicised around the same time. He later, thankfully, decided against the move, but it's something that could happen in the future, and it's very worrying. In response to this increase of imports into Ireland, the Native Irish Honeybee Society released a statement against imports. So this was a very historic document, because all the other Irish organisations in Ireland signed it with us. So it's the first time, I think, that all Irish beekeeping organisations came together and agreed on one thing and came to support something together. And so we're very grateful to those other organisations for supporting us in this statement. And those organisations that would represent beekeepers in Ireland would be FIBKA and IBA in the Republic of Ireland, and INIB and UBKA in Northern Ireland. And to read the full statement, you can log on to NIHBS.org. Identifying A.m.m. populations. So there has been a few surveys to do this. The one was the GBBG morphometry survey, which is carried out from 2007 to 2011, which identified samples were taken from all over Ireland, and there was, you can see the results here. The purple shows the 75 to 99% Apis mellifera, and this was the most common one in most of Ireland. There's also the BABE project by the University of Copenhagen back in the late 20th century, early 21st century, about roughly 22 years ago or that way, and samples were taken from different parts of Europe, and the couple of Irish samples that were taken found that they were pure Apis mellifera. This is mitochondrial DNA analysis, and the Galtee bees were found to be pure A.m.m. Limerick Institute of Technology, LIT, and National University of Ireland, Galway, NUIG, carried out an Ireland-wide DNA survey, to analyse the purity of Apis mellifera in Ireland. So this was supported by NIHBS, and it was a fantastic piece of research because it was the first time anything like this was done in Ireland, and it proved that we have significant pure population remaining here in Ireland. And as a result of that, the scientific paper, A Significant Pure Population of the Dark European Honeybee, Apis mellifera, Remains in Ireland, was published. And we're very grateful to all of those who contributed to, worked on this research or contributed in some way. So other research on A.m.m. So there's the Bee Treatment Survey monitoring Varroa levels, which monitors the survival and performance of colonies which are untreated for Varroa on an ongoing basis in multiple years. So this has been going on for 5-6 years now, maybe more. And the survival and performance of these colonies are monitored. And also the Wild Honeybee Study, which monitors colonies in the wild that are not being, managed at all, and analyzes their DNA and monitors how well they're surviving in the wild. And both these bodies of research are carried out by NUIG, and it's really essential, this type of research, for the cause of Irish Apis mellifera. So NIHBS deals with other organisations. We have the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Marine, or DAFM, which is in charge of beekeeping here in Ireland. So NIHBS has been the recipient of small grants under the Conservation of Genetic Resources Fund. And we have meetings with DAFM as well, and NIHBS has requested that VCAs be made legal, and also that we've also requested a ban on honeybee imports, but unfortunately both requests have been refused repeatedly. And the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, AIPP, is another plan that we take part in, and it's really important. This is for the conservation of all the 9 bee species in Ireland and the pollinators, and it's about making Ireland more pollinator friendly. And we take part under the Honeybee Strategy Committee, and we're very happy to be part of this. And we also have there is a bill which we have has just been put together and introduced, and this is the Protection of the Native Irish Honeybee Bill 2021. So it has just been introduced into the upper house of Parliament, called the Seanad, And it's a very long time before this could become law. But basically, it's about proposing a ban on the importation of non-native honeybee species, because we believe here in Ireland that ultimately that is the best way to prevent the extinction of Apis mellifera mellifera here. So it has had fantastic, it would not have happened really without the support of Senator Vincent Martin of the Green Party, who has introduced the bill, and also the Climate Bar Association, which provided a wonderful legal team pro bono to help us draft the bill, and Professor Grace McCormack. So with all this help, this wonderful bill was put together. So there's been tremendous support there. And yeah, so really a lot has been achieved in native Irish honeybee conservation, but there is an awful lot more to be done, but we are very hopeful for the future. And if anyone would like more information, NIHBS.org is our website. And thank you very much for your attention. Gorv Mila Mahagriv.